The OPC was set up to organize propaganda, economic warfare, preventive direct action, sabotage, demolition, subversion against hostile states, including assistance to underground resistance groups and support of indigenous anti-communist elements in threatened countries of the free world.
What happened at the end of World War II when Truman disbanded the OSS? The covert operators were in the wilderness for a little while, and some of them had been leading Wall Street bankers and lawyers. And there's a certain logic there, because prior to the war, the people engaged in international trade and international law were a relatively small number of people, and they were the specialists in international affairs for the United States. So, for example, the man who was later to become chief of covert operations, black operations for the CIA, was a man named Frank Wisner, quite a prominent Wall Street lawyer. The man who later became the director of the CIA was Allen Dulles. His career prior to World War II was basically in international law and cutting deals of one sort or another with trade partners around the world. Some of the trade partners included fascists, some aspects of Nazi Germany or companies associated with Nazi Germany, Italy. Prior to the war in World War II in Poland, there had been a military dictatorship, a very authoritarian country. Allen Dulles was made part of his living by helping to finance deals that kept that government in power. And there's many other examples along the same lines. During the war, they went into covert operations for the U.S. government because they had some expertise in dealing with foreign countries. After the war, they went back to Wall Street for a short time. And then by the late 1940s, they were back in the intelligence complex, in the two examples that I mentioned, in leadership and management type roles.
From the beginning, the CIA was steeped in elitism. Its top leadership was made up mostly of Wall Street lawyers, while new recruits were sought through the top Ivy League universities. Gaddis Smith, a history professor at Yale, remarked that Yale has influenced the Central Intelligence Agency more than any other university, giving the CIA the atmosphere of a class reunion.
Does the military engage such task forces of undercover operatives to carry out off-the-record missions? The answer to that question is yes. That answer comes from a number of sources, including Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. As a colonel in the U.S. Air Force and Chief of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Prouty worked from 1955 to 1964 as the liaison procuring military supplies, equipment, and logistics support for CIA special operations worldwide. In his 1973 tell-all, The Secret Team, Prouty discussed the inner workings of America's intelligence community, noting, "Sheep-dipped is an intricate army-devised process by which a man who is in the service as a full-career soldier or officer agrees to go through all the legal and official motions of resigning from the service. Then, rather than actually being released, his records are pulled from the Army personnel files and transferred to a special Army intelligence file. Substitute, but nonetheless real-appearing records are then processed, and the man leaves the service. He is encouraged to write to friends and give a cover reason why he got out. He goes to his bank and charge card services and changes his status to civilian, and does the hundreds of other official and personal things that any man would do if he really had gotten out of the service. Meanwhile, his real Army records are kept in secrecy, but not forgotten." This tactic was used, for example, in Project Heavy Green during the U.S. military participation in Vietnam in the 1960s. Restricted from deploying troops in Laos by the 1962 Geneva Accords, 48 Air Force personnel were instead sheep-dipped and deployed in Laos as civilian employees of Lockheed to service a bombing radar installation there.
Further on, concerning the realization of the Dulles-Jackson Korea's report's method of placing CIA agents throughout the government, quote, "Many of these people who have reached positions of great responsibility, I believe that the most powerful and certainly the most useful agent the CIA has ever had operates in just such a capacity within another branch of the government, and he has been there for so long that few have any idea that he is a long-term career agent of the CIA. Through his most excellent and skillful services, more CIA operations have been enabled to take place than can be laid at the feet of the agency, at the feet of any other, more legitimate agent. This was the plan and the wisdom of the Dulles idea from the beginning. On the basis of security, he would place people in all areas of the government, and then he would move them up and deeper into their cover jobs until they began to take a very active part in the role of their own organizations. This is how the ST was born, the secret team. Today, the role of the CIA is performed by an ad hoc organization that is much greater in size, strength, and resources than the CIA has ever been visualized to be. So the first question I have here would be, how, quote, on the basis of security, unquote, would Allen Dulles, quote, place people in all other areas of the government?
Well, one of the first things that I realized was that it was Mr. Dulles' desire to have the office that General White asked me to create in the Air Force headquarters in order to create a focal point system. And as Mr. Dulles told me later, he said, I don't want various people from my agency going into the Pentagon and dealing with different people there, and therefore uncovering the activities of the CIA to a large number of people, because obviously such a ring would then proliferate to others, and if they wanted submarines, they'd have to bring in some Navy people, and if they wanted helicopters, they'd have to talk to some Army people. He said, I want a focal point. I want an office that's cleared to do what we have to have done, an office that knows us very, very well, and then an office has access to a system in the Pentagon, but the system will not be aware of what initiated the request. They'll think it came from the Secretary of Defense. They won't realize it came from the Director of Central Intelligence. So you see, the Dulles philosophy was to control the focal point area. This led then to the creation of focal point offices everywhere. And as I established this Tab 6 organization, we called it, in every major staff area within the Air Force, because that was my jurisdiction at the time, I would have cleared people, another focal point, you might say a sub-focal point, a person I could go to who had been given ahead of time the authority to do whatever it was that he was authorized to do. And we stressed that authorized business. He would have to be sure he had orders either from my office or directly up to the Chief of Staff, and that we knew what we were doing for CIA. Well, this leads to another step you might call breeding. We had to work with various agencies of the government, not just the Defense Department. We had to have contact points in the State Department, in the FAA, in the Customs Service, in the Treasury, in the FBI, and all around through the government, up in the White House. And gradually we wove a network of people who understood the symbols and the code names and the things we were doing and how we handled money, which was the most important thing. And then we began to assign people there who those agencies thought were from the Defense Department, but they actually were people that we put there from the CIA.